Okay, good morning. You ready to wrap this thing up? You can eat and take notes at the same time, right? But because of the nature of today's last session, I want to have enough time for you to ask questions because we're going to try to pull things together and finish up your calling quilts today. So while you're eating, let me remind you how wonderful you are. Have I told you that before? I think I've told you how wonderful you are, but you are. You're a masterpiece. And you were built to count. You were built to matter. You were built to count as water is made to run downhill. In the context that you are in, no one else is in your context. You are built to count in ways that no one else does or can, because you're so unique and wonderful. That's your destiny, is to count in ways that God designed for you to count. This whole workshop has been designed to help you discover that calling because it's discoverable. You can figure it out. And so what we've been doing for the last 3 weeks is essentially taking a deep dive into your life, paying attention to your life, and the 4 dimensions of your life, elements of your life, aspects, however you want to describe it, that define you are your life story, your personality, your skills, and your passions, which we're going to talk briefly about this morning before we wrap this up. Your life story consists of the good, the bad, the wondrous, and the ugly. And my contention is if you pay attention to your life story, you'll find elements in there that are like breadcrumbs that lead to your calling in this world. There are things that have happened to you, have been said to you. Some, believe it or not, there are things that happen in a 10-minute span. I've seen this happen. Just something that happened momentarily in their life that actually shapes an entire life story and shapes a calling. It's amazing. And there have been people, the good and bad, that have really influenced you. Your personality, you're unique, whether you're a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or some mix of all of them. Your personality shapes your calling. Your skills shape your calling, and then your passions. I think I said this to you last week. When we get to the end, if you want to discover the what of your calling, like what is my calling, you pay very careful attention to the mix of your life story and your passions. And then once you discover what it is, then you go back to your personality and skills and answer the question, well, how am I supposed to go about fulfilling my calling? Your personality and skills will tell you how to do that. All right, so before we wrap this up and talk about passions, does anyone have any question at all about what has led us to this point so far? Anything? All right, well, something may come up today, and I want to make sure it's not all the time that I can open it up and say, if you want to talk about you personally, we might be able to do that a little bit today. So save your questions or think of your questions, and we'll talk about them in a little while. But let's talk about passions. On this page, session 5, you'll see in your workbook, is this quote by Donna Markova, which I like her book, I Will Not. Wow, there's a misprint in my workbook. It's supposed to say, I will not die an unlived life. That was my bad, and I should have, at any rate. But she says that she asked this question, what is the urge that calls me beyond the familiar into unexplored territory? What is smoldering inside of me? Where is my passion? Where is my passion? To help you understand passion, let me tell you a couple of stories. And I can't, again, I've done this so much, I don't remember who I told what. But here's a couple of passions that I found interesting. You may or may not, did I talk to you about last time about Hunter Smith, who used to play for the Colts, about his passion? Well, as a reminder, he had a very successful career, NFL career. But when we walked through this process together, he realized that his growing up on a farm in Texas, before he went to Notre Dame and then was drafted by the Colts, his growing up in a farm had a profound impact on him. There were two things that hit him. Number one, being on the farm, engaged in the land, and doing that as a family, created a safe and loving atmosphere for his family that became almost like a shining star to him. This is huge and important. Now, he had the means to be able to buy when he retired from the NFL. He and his wife had the opportunity to purchase some land and actually have a farm themselves. But this passion for families and the land became so important to him that he and his wife decided, they live in Zionsville, they decided to open up their farm on Saturdays and call it Farm Day or Farm Life. And families anywhere in central Indiana that want to come and interact with the animals, be close to the land, enjoy being together on a Saturday, they've created Farm Life. And the whole idea is to help families be healthier and stronger and allow people who live in the suburbs or the city to taste farm life that maybe they've never tasted. That's an unusual passion. And at the end of the day, it's healing families, helping families. Then there's Kate Richards. Kate is a young lady who lives in New Jersey, and she actually works for New York City Relief. I think she works for volunteer development for an organization who works with the homeless in New York. And you would think that would be her passion, but that's really not her passion. That's her job. Her passion comes out of how she grew up. As she grew up, she always felt like an outsider. She never fit anywhere. And I think in her struggle, she struggled with her sexuality. She lived among the LGBT community for a long time as she worked through who she was. So that was the idea of never fitting was a negative influence on her life. But the positive influence in her life was her grandma. And her grandma, she described her grandma as having a big tent. Meaning not literal tent, but her grandma was this arms open, you're all welcome, and Kate could remember growing up, and there were all kinds of people from races and nationalities and backgrounds that would show up at Grandma's house, and Grandma was a big tent woman, okay? Well, she realized that her passion, coming out of her not feeling connected, and feeling alienated, but wanting to be like her grandma, is that Kate has started to develop now. She sees herself as creating safe spaces for people who don't belong. And so she's constantly having people over to her apartment, to her house. If you looked at her bunch of friends, it looks like a menagerie. It looks like people of all kinds who don't have normal places to connect. So Kate's passion is actually now as broached into her calling. She is looking for the people who are disconnected to pull them into her life. Amazing. Gerald. Anybody know Gerald Cozy who attends here? Okay, I don't know if you know his whole story, but Gerald had a very good job in pharma sales. He was pharmaceuticals. Had a team of people he's working with, but there was always this nagging passion in him because the way Gerald grew up, his mom and dad died when he was young, and so he was raised by his grandma and grandpa. And his great-grandma and great-grandpa were alive, and so in essence, the entire generation shifted down, so grandma and grandpa became mom and dad, and great-grandma and great-grandpa became grandma and grandpa. So the bottom line is, Gerald grew up around seniors. So he had seniors in his life, older folks in his life from a very young age. And that resonated with him so deeply in his adult years that he had a passion for seniors. And he started looking at seniors differently and seeing their need to be connected. And the fact that many seniors, as you know, are isolated, even when they're, especially when they're in nursing homes. And having gone through that with my mother, it's rare that they get visited So you know all about that. Well, at any rate, Gerald was so passionate about that, he decided to leave pharma sales and started to pursue a brand new career later in life. He saw himself as being an overseer or supervisor for a senior care facility, for a senior care community. Now, to do that, he was so passionate about it, he had to learn a whole new job, and to do that, he had to serve for periods of time as an apprentice in every area within a nursing home community. And you can just imagine what he had to because he had to serve as an aide for a period of time. And yes, he was cleaning up all manners of messes, and he had to work in the cafeteria for a while, and to the point where now he is overseeing a senior care facility, and he's gone one step further because he's always one of his skills, he's a great communicator. So he started speaking about isolation in seniors, and then he started speaking about how to lead within the senior community. He is now an on-call speaker nationwide for senior care facilities. And he's unusual in who he is. But that's a man pursuing his passion. These are just examples. So if you haven't answered these questions yet, you can take a moment, if you haven't done it yet, and answer these questions. What is it that breaks your heart? What in this broken world makes you sad or angry? What is it that you wish you could fix? What experiences have you had meeting people's needs that have motivated you? What have you always wanted to do but never could because you were supposed to be or do something else? I think I just wrote about this in my blog post this past 2 days ago, yesterday, that a lot of people don't pursue their passions because they think they're supposed to do something else. They're supposed to be something else. And which of the 6 broken places of the world most moves you? Injustice, isolation, hatred, pain, decay of the planet, or alienation? These are absolutely critical questions. Now, I'll stop talking in a minute and I'll let you work on this a bit. Let me clarify the word passion. I have a passion for cooking, and I'm reasonably good at it, and I've gotten better at it the more I've done it. But that passion for cooking is not my calling. That passion for cooking, because it benefits me mostly, and yes, my wife benefits and family benefits when I cook for people, but it is mostly for me. And a passion that is for me is a hobby. A passion that is directed outwardly to others plays into your calling. A passion that is focused on others is an act of love. Here's another. I love musical theater. I have a passion for. If I'm going to go to a Broadway show, it's probably going to be something that includes music. And I've seen all the big ones. Some of them I've seen more than once, twice, 3 times even, some of them, because I have a passion for musical theater. That's not my calling. Clearly, it's not my calling. It is my hobby. So a passion directed at our own benefit is a hobby, and they're good, they're wonderful. But a passion directed to others and meeting the needs of others of the world is part of your calling. Now, I'm going to stop right there and see if you have any questions. Are there any questions or reactions to this that would be helpful for us to deal with, specifically about passions? Question? Yes?
Could a passion turn into a calling? Like a passion of cooking, becoming a calling of cooking for others who can't get out of the house and home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's where, and I considered that at one point because I enjoyed it so much. I mean, should I direct this outwardly to take food to people as an act of love? Yes, it's entirely possible. I mean, all right, let's brainstorm this. How could my passion for musical theater turn into a calling? It's a little out there, but use your heads.
You could do like Big Brothers Big Sisters and like take a little to a show, something that they wouldn't get to experience otherwise.
Yeah, because what it starts with, who could benefit from this? And how could I engage them in this? Because, I mean, there are children out there or other people that love musical theater. So if it's a way for me to touch someone's life, then yes. Okay, we have the microphone if you have other questions.
Sorry, I know you all love the microphone.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Okay, test. Okay, I got to turn it.
So, where does God's will for your life come into play with all these? Because this all feels very self-focused and very, what can I do? What about me? What's my personality? What are my hobbies? But then, how do you incorporate? Because God may have a different plan. He will use the skills He gave you, but how are we tying that all together?
My main assumption about God's will is He works through our feelings, through our circumstances, to reveal to us our place that He wants us to be in the world. It is not as mystical as we think it is. It's not something that I have to sit around and wait for Him to reveal it to me. It's probably going to come through my own perceptions and feelings. That's how God operates, because He created us this way. And so I'll say it plainly this way. If you have a burning passion, if you have a passion to do something for someone or some people, and a lot of it comes out of your life story, then it is God's will. He operates in the normal aspects of you. Does that make sense? I think, I was just reading this the other day. There's no reason for us to think that if I feel deeply about something, that's something that's selfish. It could very well be me working in tandem with the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit generating that desire. So then, yeah, you can pretty much take it to the bank. If you feel, unless it's something that's really out there and against God's will, against the Bible, it probably is His will coming right out of your heart. That's a great question. Other questions? Yeah.
So as I thought about my passions this week, I had a hard time thinking of what they were, like coming up with what they were. And especially ones that were not hobbies, like keeping that in mind of like trying to focus on which passions might be outward facing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a 9. I'm learning. I like to just go along with what everyone around me is doing, and so I have a really hard time seeing what it is that might be unique.
Yeah, 9 spend a lot of time denying their passions.
So it is hard.
For 9s, it's very, probably, whereas 4s and 7s have more passions than anyone in the world, and they're not afraid to tell you about it. 7's passion changes every 24 hours, but the 4's passion. 9 struggle the most. So I'm not surprised. So in your case, for 9s, it probably, 9s could stand for a good long talk with friends who know them so that they can draw you out and say, you know, if I was talking to you one-on-one, I would say, you know, when we look at the world, you know, is there anything that just makes your heart ache a little bit? And then I would encourage you to say, okay, let's go deeper on that, because I think there's probably something in there. But you need coaxing. So let me ask you, anything that makes your heart hurt?
Yes.
Like what? Tell me.
That was a very helpful question for me. am so sad for people that feel totally alone, isolation.
Feel lonely?
Yeah, totally cut off or
Yeah.
without resources or
Yeah.
alone.
So here's a way to test it. Test that. If that is your passion, which may be leaning towards your calling, when you sense, and as a 9, you're going to have a sense of that more than the average person. Then engage that person in ways that you feel that might bring them a sense of love or care, and watch what happens. So yours is, you need to enter into a period of experimenting with your calling or your passion. And over time, you'll get better at it, and you'll feel more deeply about it. Does that help?
Yes, a lot.
Good. Great questions. Other questions? Because we're getting down to the nub here. We're getting down to the core. Okay, so far, here's what your calling quilt should have. Probably most of your calling quilt, it could be half to almost the entire page could be filled with your life story, people, the good, the bad, the ugly, the wondrous, all those things. A few of the patches are going to contain elements that describe your personality. You've already hopefully transferred to your calling quilt. A few of the patches will list your skills. And then probably only one or two, unless you're a 7 when you have all the passions in the world, there's probably one or two things that really will show up on your calling quilt. When you answer these questions like, what in this broken world makes you sad or angry? Which of the 6 broken places? So if you haven't done that, transfer the results of this page on clarifying your passions onto your calling quilt. And once you've done that, your calling quilt, as of right now, is complete. So if you haven't done it, go ahead and do that. I'm assuming you already have. If you haven't, go ahead and finish your calling quilt with your passions, and then we're going to do the hard work of connecting the dots. So while you're working on that, I'm going to ask if there's anyone, without any prompting, any further prompting, going through this, you have the beginning of an idea of what your calling might be. Would you mind? Do you mind sharing? Do you guys mind sharing that with us? I think two of you. Brooke, do you want to go first?
Yeah, do you want me to speak about kind of how I got there?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So going through this, it affirmed what I already thought was true. My childhood was kind of unstable. My home wasn't the best environment, and we didn't know God. But my neighbors took me to church, and that's when I found safety and love. So I knew what it was like to experience a safe environment and love. And then just going through this whole process and asking people what they see in me and who I am, I believe that my calling, and I'm able to also do it in my job, is creating a loving and safe environment for others. It breaks my heart when people don't know what it's like to feel loved by God. So alienation and pain are my two biggest areas of sadness, I would say.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, that's exactly what this process, what did you see? Hear what she did. She brought the pieces of her life together to point in this direction. Now, does that energize you then?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I've done a lot of things in my life that I felt good at. I mean, was in retail management for years, and I was very successful, but I've never found joy in the good and in the bad as I do when I'm connecting with not only children, but their families or other adults who just need to feel loved.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. I've got so many things going through my mind, but I'll stop right now because that's beautiful. Did you say you have an idea?
Well, I have a passion for art, and I do.
Sorry.
Photography and painting and have a degree in it. But after college, I took a teaching position in a very poor inner city school in Florida.
Yeah.
Where 50% were second language. And so I got to use my passion, but I discovered that it was that act of serving and reaching these kids that I didn't have any experience with before growing up. I didn't have any experience in that kind of world or anything. So I learned that there's imbalance in the education system and the needs that they need, but also how introducing my passion and sharing that with them has really taught me a lot of serving and things. And then also, I think more recently with my growing to know God, I've had more experiences that have drawn me closer and to be more confirmed in Jesus and how that he's shown me in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So I have more of a passion now to use that to share with people maybe through that experience of art or doing art and then teaching that as I meet with people and also serve people. So it's kind of like dual, but I also have a son with autism, and I've learned a lot through that. I wanted to serve that too because I know there's
Sure.
a lot of art therapy. So I guess my question would be, how do you execute that to learn a good way of, like, can you find communities that need those services and then start like finding ways of doing that and those, how do you do that?
Great question. That's a great question. And that will actually lead, I'll talk about what next steps are. But when you get to this point, when you have a pretty good idea of what it is, the art therapy is how you're going to pursue your calling. The art therapy is the beautiful way for, it sounds to me, for people. Let me ask you this. When you look at a person and you realize your art therapy can help them, what will it do for them? What could it do?
Well, I don't do art therapy. It's just something that that I know can help.
Oh, okay.
But when I was teaching and I was just teaching art classes,
Yeah.
I realized that these kids didn't have any experience or any other kind of classes with art.
Okay.
They were learning for the first time that was something that they had a passion for and had an opportunity to do that they didn't have exposure to like in their school.
Okay, so it was exposing people who would not normally have the opportunity. And when you look at them and you see them experiencing something that's new, something happens inside that little heart, right? And does that move you when you see them? Okay, do you see what happened? Did you see you smiled? If I could push you and you would start weeping within about 5 minutes if I painted the picture of a little child who learns the wonder of art, right? Yeah. See, that's the beautiful thing. So, to answer your question directly, there's a couple things you could do. Yes, you could start looking around and asking around, say, where can I find this in action that I could partner with? Another thing you could do is find an organization that doesn't use art but could use that as a part of what they're about. I mean, I'm thinking of Lift right here at Grace. What would it look to incorporate art into that? And then the third thing is if you've got some courage and you're deeply passionate, you can create something yourself, and which you've already thought of, haven't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to give those kids that don't have those opportunities to do art like that, a place and a way and access to doing that.
Good for you. So
the teaching full time is just too much, you know.
Right.
So there's more of like a nonprofit.
Yep. And I've seen that happen over and over again with people. Now, it is probably the hardest path to go when you discover a calling and you want to create a whole movement around that calling. But it is also unbelievably fulfilling at the same time. And it doesn't have to be nonprofit. It can be for-profit. That's what I've done. You know, it's a for-profit thing, but you could do the same thing. So those are your options.
Do churches offer opportunities? Is that a starting place to maybe look into, or?
Absolutely. I mean, I would. I know a church.
A church. She knows. We know it. We know.
I know. I also know somebody you could talk to, but absolutely. So this is all the experimentation. Experiment, push, try, and if it's a passion, you'll do it. If it's just but if it's a passion, start poking around. And then I get emotional thinking about this. Watch what happens when you start poking around. Because God says, I've got her attention now. And now, that goes back to the question about God's will. Now that He's got our attention, then He starts showing off. So over the next 30 to 60 days, watch what happens. He'll start revealing it to you. And that's when He confirms that this is His will. Anybody else have an idea what your calling might be? Now that you've putting all these pieces together? How about a passion? If it's too big to talk about calling, what is it you're passionate about? Do you not know, or you just not want to say? Okay.
I feel like I have two, and they're kind of separate, so I'm trying to figure out how I can bring them together. But poverty, like homelessness and hunger, like really tugs at my heart, both locally and globally.
Right.
And broken families. And so when I see families broken through divorce and abuse, those things really work on my heart. So I'm trying to think, is there a way to put them together, or?
Yeah. So, all right. So let's, your personality, what are you?
I'm a 2.
A 2. So most of the way you're going to apply your passion is going to be in the interpersonal, relational way, okay? Because if you were an 8 or a 3, you would probably take those passions and say, what organization can I support, or what can I create to deal with this? But as a 2, you're probably thinking, how can I get close to these people who are struggling with poverty, and the families that are broken in it, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Those two weave together very nicely, because there are organizations you could start finding the organizations with whom you resonate that essentially give access to families in poverty who are struggling as a family. And then you just come alongside them in your relational way and find ways of connecting with families to love and care for them. Or, the real commando way of going is simply, and some people do this, if that's your calling, you just live every day waiting for it to come to you. And again, once God got your attention, you might find yourself being brought close to families that are in that circumstance, and then you just act. That's what I call the commando way. It's like, when I see it, I'm going to jump in and do it. The more regimented way is to find the organization that is providing those kind of connections. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, and third, or create something on your own, which is the most strenuous, but might be what you're supposed to do. But I would not rest. In your case, let me ask you something. Writing a check is not going to do it for you, right?
Right.
Organizing something is not going to do it for you. You've got to be with the people.
Yeah.
All right. You cannot stop until that happens. You've got to get yourself close to those people. And when you get close to a family that is struggling as a family, and one of the reasons is poverty, and you love on them, however you find it, you will soar. And you will probably cry your eyes out, and at the same time feel like you've never been more fulfilled than you are right now when you engage. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Good. See how this works? I want to do this so that you see how all these pieces come together. Now that we've gone down this road, you were going to say something? Yeah, question.
So knowing myself, I'm probably not someone that's going to start an organization.
Right.
Because of the interpersonal. I remember at the beginning you had said that some callings are not, I don't want to say they aren't big. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but some of them are not. How do you know if you are living into a calling that is not as big as what God wants you to be doing? If it's a small relational one-on-one, I don't know how.
Yeah. Well, first of all, small or big is immaterial.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yes. Yeah.
Because legacies, the legacy, if you remember on the list of words, legacies are not always played out in big swaths that are impressive. Sometimes they're in individual lives. Your legacy is going to be measured in probably individual families that you've interacted with. So the size of it is immaterial. It just doesn't matter. Now, if you sense that you're not fully expressing it, and maybe there's something more, you'll feel it. You will not, because God's now got your attention, and if you have this sense that there could be more, then act on it. But here's one thing I would caution with, and nines would probably feel this much as any. Don't be tricked by guilt, which says, "Oh, you're not doing enough." Don't be tricked by that, because that can take you down, especially nines. So respond to the opportunities you have, watch what happens, and then if you feel a hunger to go deeper, further, then do it. But in the meantime, just wait.
Thank you.
Let's keep going. Other questions? We've bridged over into how do you determine your calling. So if you want to look at this page on session 6 in the workbook. If you're still struggling with identifying your calling, here's a couple of things to look for. Look in your life story or in your passion for emotion. Like when you say things like, "This was the high point of my life," or "This was the low point of my life." Look for emotion, because we're whole persons. And it's not just this idea of finding calling, but it's a deeply emotional thing. Something touched you. Brooke just explained the emotion of her past that played into her calling. I'm just curious about the whole idea of hunger and that. Do you have something from your past emotionally?
Not that I can think of, which I think is why I'm a little hung up on my passions. I can't figure out what from my childhood has spurred that. But
Might not have.
Even as a kid, I always felt horrible for when you see homeless people on the street, and that's always been a tug. Now, family brokenness, I have family that have divorce in it, so I don't know if is part of that for sure.
Probably. It doesn't have to be a massive experience, but it's something that like if you say from early childhood, you remember how you felt when you saw poverty, you still feel that. It's almost as if it was the day you saw it for the first time.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, but that's normally what happens. So it's stuck with you for a long, long time. Interesting. I mean, I don't mean to sound callous. That's not an emotional experience from my past. And so, but it is from yours. And so that's how emotional life experiences can play into calling. It doesn't have to be gargantuan. It could be something small too. All right, so look for emotion, intensity. Usually, when I'm walking through this individually with a person and they say something like, this woman I was walking through on Monday, I met with her, Tina. She said, I will never forget him or her. I can't remember. It was a mentor. I will never forget. And I said, why? And then she waxed rhapsodic about the impact of this person on her life. And when you hear something like that, there's a transference that happens emotionally with a person who had that much of an impact that it is only natural that you say, I want to be like them. Like Kate Richards, I was telling you about Kate and her grandma. Her grandma has had such a profound impact. She just wants to be like her grandma. So look for some intense statement like that. Or look for and you can see this on session 6, pay attention to your pain or brokenness. I remind you that if you've received any comfort from God for anything, the clock is then ticking in that God wants you to distribute that same sense of resolution that you felt, the same sense of blessing or the same sense of care that you felt from God. You're now able to deliver that to other people. Probably, I don't know what percentage, a high percentage of people who have a profound emotional, painful experience in their past can see ways that becomes their calling. So, and then you can just step back, and this is something, I hope you will do this as friends and in your small group and you connect with people. You can step back and look at your whole story and just look at it and say, sometimes it's almost like God pulls out, you say, I never saw that before. I never thought of that before. But when you see those kind of things, you pay attention to them because God may be telling you something. All right, I'm going to stop. Other questions? Or do you want to, I'm happy to do an interpretation on the fly if you have some questions about your own life. And it would be instructive for other people, too.
Hey, Dave, I have a question. When I did this, something that really helped me, and I apologize, maybe you already said this and I missed it, was when you said, look through your patches of your quilt and find the common things and maybe put a mark or a dot or somehow mark them. That was really helpful for me to say, oh, I never noticed that this was in my life story, but it also came up here in this organization. And
Do you remember from your life the example of that?
No.
But you were able to tie the elements together. Does anybody else? So that is absolutely true. And when I work one-on-one with a person, I'm helping them to do that. Like I will say, and most of the time when I do that with a person, they'll say, well, I never thought of that. I said, do you see the theme? Like this keeps occurring. Sometimes when you're walking through, if you see a word that keeps appearing, you go, well, what is that? Well, what, did you see a word keep appearing? Yeah, you don't have to put it on the recording, but you really ought to tell me what it was. But you saw a word or a thing keep appearing. Okay. That's a good clarification. It's a big chance for you to ask this. Linda? What's that? Oh, okay. You were just talking. Okay. All right. So last chance, and I'll let you go talk about this in your groups. Any other questions or reactions? All right. Turn to the page which says moving forward, your next steps. And I'll leave you with this. So here's what you do now. Watch for confirmation of your calling. Talk to your friends and loved ones. Recount to them what you've learned at this workshop. Pay attention to their responses to you. Do further research on your calling. See who is already doing what you feel led to do. That's a really cool thing to do. Begin to chronicle all the times you now hear or see something related to your calling. You'll be more attuned to it than ever. If you told me that you are thinking about buying a new car and you're looking at Volkswagens, tell me what you would see on the road everywhere you drove. Volkswagens. You would see them everywhere. Oh my gosh, there's a Volkswagen, there's a Volkswagen. When you become attuned, you're going to now see this everywhere. And when you see it everywhere, that becomes another confirmation of your calling. Second thing you want to do is act on your calling. Whatever the summons on your life, take action to respond to it. Devote time and energy to bring healing and change to the world in your unique way. As you do, take stock of the effect you have on others and be aware of how it makes you feel. Last night I was on a phone call with an older gentleman, probably in his 80s, 70s, 80s. I'm doing a consultation with a church in Colorado that is a big old dumpster fire, and they're in trouble. And so this guy, I just was interviewing him to get some clarity. He was on the board at one time, and bless his heart, he just was he didn't want to criticize anybody. And we got to the end of the time, and I just had this sense. I looked at him and I said, Rich, can I tell you something? You know, I've been around the church most of my life, and a pastor for many years, and you are something. Your faithfulness to serve God through leadership in the church for so many years is something. I just want to say thank you. I've never met you before, but I want to say thank you. And he couldn't talk. He started to weep on this FaceTime call. And it was because what I've learned over the last 9 months as I've been doing this is that when people are given the picture of what they can be or their impact on the world, when they're told about their contribution to the world, which is essentially what I do now every day. That's what I've linked my calling and my job. And I watched that and I thought, you know how much time it took me to invest in that man? This much time with one statement. And so what that did was fire me up. It fired me up to do this more. So watch for the impact you have on other people, and it will fire you up. It will confirm it. And then the final thing is assess the relationship between your calling, job, and career. Now, Brooke said she is able to link her calling directly with her job and career. You may not be able to do that, and that's not even necessarily what you should do. Your calling may be completely disconnected from your job, and that's perfectly fine, but understand that your job, which you might like and are good at, can be a way to finance your ability to do your calling. I keep picking on Brooke, but you know, as a leader here at Grace, she depends on hundreds of those kind of people who have a job or other roles in life to also engage in their calling at the same time. Then there are some of you who have this unique ability to take your job or career and have your calling intersect or touch on it. Just out of curiosity, is there anybody like that you're realizing? So what is your job?
I'm a nurse in a nursing home.
You're in a nurse, okay. So, and what's your calling?
Caring for the elderly, serving the elderly.
Well, I would say you're probably closer to Brooke in that the thing you do, the job you do, is almost interwoven with caring for the elderly. Why do you love caring for the elderly?
Honestly, I think looking back, I don't really have a certain anything that really was in my history. I know that I wanted to be a nurse. I actually wanted to be in the emergency room. I got my EMT first.
Okay.
And when I was at Wishart in the ambulance triage, it was my first day. I was really excited to see gunshot wounds and stabbings. And, but there was a little 93-year-old who came in with dementia and shingles, and she just stole my heart. And from that moment, I knew that that's what I was supposed to do. But I've had a struggle over the last few years because I'm a 3, and I've switched from being a nurse to a more management type role, kind of like Gerald Cozy.
Yeah.
And I'm really good at it, but it hasn't been filling my cup as much, so I just stepped down to be a nurse, just back on the floor and in the trenches. And that was hard for me as a 3 to say, okay, I'm stepping down as a leader, but you were talking about her weeping, and I'm not an emotional person, but just yesterday at work, I sat on her residence bed and just told her how beautiful she is and how I love her smile and how she matters. And I could have just sat there weeping, just her looking back at me and just being like, felt like she was seen, and especially now during the COVID time. So
Yep.
It's been like doing this, I realized that stepping down was the right choice for me.
Bingo. Bingo. Now, let's go a little deeper. That feeling you had, it might be, as you spoke to her and about her, how she mattered and all that, your calling may now be getting even more refined. Okay, so watch for this. It may be that as you care for people, especially those seniors who are so vulnerable, almost like a 3-year-old,
Yeah.
but in a different way, it might be that God's saying, and your real specialty in your calling is to help them understand how they matter, because no one else is telling them that. So experiment now with using that kind of terminology with people and watch what happens. You'll be weeping all the time. Thank you. That's helpful. All right. Kara, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I will say this to you. If you would like, this is an honest invitation. If you want or know someone that would appreciate sitting down with me one-on-one, it's a process that usually, it's a 3-hour session that I walk through with people, and then 2 one-hour follow-ups when I have one-on-one with people. I do a lot. I probably do, that's as much as, I do that a lot. I do these workshops, but I also do these personal sessions. You might have a spouse or a friend that would benefit, or if you have a group of people that you would like to, I can walk a group of people through this workshop. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to do that and go from there. It's been good to be with you. There you go. Now you can talk to each other about this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.